What is going on, guys? Stefan here with you, S&E's Garage. Behind us, we have our Mazda 6 with the blown engine. Over here, we have the new engine for it. In our last video, we went ahead, cleaned all the carbon buildup inside of the intake ports. We did a leak down test, put some new spark plugs in it. Found out it's in really nice shape. So today, we're gonna be slinging the engine. So I actually have a very good friend of mine coming that's a certified Mazda tech. We went to college together. I ended up with Hyundai and he ended up with Mazda. Long story short, he's gonna come help me drop this thing out. He's on his way now. So we're just gonna go ahead and start. We're gonna get a head start on it. So first thing I need to do here is get up underneath the dash and we're gonna pull the steering column. That way we can drop the subframe, and then I'm gonna get it up in the air and start draining fluids. We are going to be dropping this engine straight out of the bottom. I have this little pallet here that the new engine came with, and then we have a bigger pallet right there that we are going to set that on top of, and we're gonna literally drop the engine and transmission as an assembly right on the pallet, lift the car up, and the whole powertrain is basically gonna stay on that pallet. So let me get that steering shaft out and then let's rack her up on the lift. Now I just want to start by saying this is not going to be one of my typical instructional videos. We're not going to, it'll take 3 days to get this engine out if we stop at every point and show you what we're doing. We're just going to kind of time lapse through it. I'll stop every once in a while and tell you what we're doing. So what you're going to see here is we got this shield out and the steering shaft is disconnected. So now I'm just gonna throw it neutral, roll it forward, get it up on the lift, and like I said, drop the belly pan and start draining fluids. So what we're doing here is we're just setting the car up on the lift and we're getting ready to pull the wheels. In order to drop this subframe, we are going to have to do some things with the suspension as far as the lower control arms and the sway bar end links are concerned. They need to be disconnected because we plan on leaving these struts in the vehicle, so that's what you see us doing right now. And now you see us prepping to drop the splash shields. You'll see I just got the main one down for the engine, and now I'm working on the one for the radiator area. That way we can drain the coolant oil emulsion out of there and whatever oil is left in the pan, which unfortunately there really wasn't much. All right, guys, so we're here with my buddy Brandon. Brandon and I actually went to college together for automotive. Like I was telling you before, I ended up with Hyundai and he ended up with Mazda, so we're bringing in an expert here, and he says we'll have this thing out in about an hour. What do you think?
Yeah, give it an hour and a half. Depends on how much we stop and talk.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be doing some of that. But all right, let's start you up on a time lapse and let's get to work. All right, guys, so what you see us doing here is just kind of talking and creating a game plan here. What we ended up deciding to do is leaving the lower control arms bolted up to the steering knuckle and just swinging them out from the subframe. We disconnected the tie rod end links and we disconnected the sway bar end links. And then we had to unbolt the axles from the knuckle, and that's going to allow us to basically drop the engine, transmission, and axles in one piece and leave most of the suspension in the vehicle. That way we're not having to mess with alignments or having to juggle with struts while we try to, lower this subframe down, because it is pretty large, and even though we got two guys, it's cumbersome. So that is what we decided would be the easiest way to tackle this. Now, during the filming of this video, Brandon and I obviously had some, catching up to do, because it's been a little while since we've seen each other. And he was filling me in on, some of the things going on in his life. And he has a 1-year-old daughter named Brielle. And unfortunately, a couple of months ago, she was diagnosed with a rare form of childhood leukemia. And they've been going back and forth to specialized hospitals and all kinds of things for treatment. And they do have a GoFundMe going on because both him and his wife have been missing work and things like that. And every little bit helps. So I am going to leave a link to their GoFundMe in the video description below. Feel free to donate. If you can't donate, give it a share. Every little bit helps. The more information we can get out there about what he has going on and the more help we can get him, I think that would be fantastic. And I know the car community is, we are always there for each other, and it would be nice to see if, there's anything we could do for him. So now you see us getting ready to disconnect the
exhaust manifold from the rest of the exhaust. The exhaust manifold comes down with the engine, so you do need to drop a couple of panels in order to gain access to it. Right after the flex pipe, I believe it was. It actually came out super easy. I was really, excited about that. The car being a 2016, usually the exhaust components are one of the first things to rust, and this thing came apart extremely well. As you'll see in the video, we really didn't hit that many snags, which is a good thing. We are now ready to drop the subframe, so you'll see we stuck the dead man or the pole jack underneath the large side of the subframe, because the back of the subframe towards the back of the car is where the brunt of the suspension components bolt to. The subframe on the Mazda 6 has two little extensions that come up to the front bumper that kind of help support it in the event of a collision. So it's kind of cumbersome and awkward, so you'll see when we drop it, it's a little awkward, but we get it out and down no problem.
All right, Brandon, how long do you think we've been working on this thing? 45 minutes, hour maybe?
Hour, 45 minutes, yeah, not long at all.
We got the subframe out with Brandon's help. He showed me a little trick here. You basically leave the control arms connected at the knuckle with the ball joint, so you're not fighting that to get it out. Pull the axles. You'll see the subframe sitting right here. We got our dookie coming out of the radiator here. And next thing we're gonna do is pull that compressor, try to move it over to the side, and we'll be ready to drop this thing down. All we got up there is the upper hose, right?
Upper hose and the heater core hoses, that's it.
Cool. All right, let's get you back on the time lapse.
So what you see us doing here is pulling the belt and the air conditioning compressor. The reason we want to pull the compressor before we lower the engine down is so we don't have to evacuate or recharge the air conditioning system. The less we can disturb there, the better, because once you remove the O-rings on a 6, 7, 8-year-old car, you can induce leaks, and it's also going to cost me money to have somebody evacuate and recharge this. Here we are disconnecting the shifter cable going to the selector shaft on the top of the transmission. Super easy. It's only held in with a clip. It's not like a nut or a bolt or anything like how on the Hyundais would be. It literally clips right in with a little safety clip, and it's a really good design. And now we're just disconnecting the heater core hoses and the hoses that go down to the automatic transmission cooler. We're just starting to get everything out of the way. That way the powertrain is basically completely disconnected from the car minus the engine mounts, and you'll see what happens next. Now, unfortunately for us, I do not have a powertrain table. That would have made this job a lot easier because it did fight us going back in quite a bit. You'll see that later on. But what we ended up doing is using 2 pallets. We grabbed the pallet on the side of the road that I saw probably last week or so, and then we stacked the pallet that the new engine came in on top of that, and we were basically able to fit the whole powertrain into that second little square pallet, and we dropped the engine onto that and undid the mounts and lifted the car up, and the engine stayed on the ground. Again, with a little bit of finagling because of that air conditioning compressor being in the way, but ultimately, as you'll see, we got it out.
All right, guys, and what you're going to see here is the whole powertrain is out on a pallet, looking good. You see the dookie came out of the engine. It's still dripping from everywhere, so we are going to have to flush that heater core. That trans cooler is probably going to have to get flushed, and we're going to have to flush the radiator before we fill this up with coolant, but that's all stuff that we can do once the engine is in the car, and it'll basically be a rolling chassis again with the subframe back in it. So what's next here, Brandon? We got to start pulling accessories off of this thing?
Pull the accessories, get the harness, and we actually don't even remove it entirely. We just flip it over
on top of the trans. Yep.
And, keep rocking and rolling.
Cool.
Hour and a half in so far.
Yep, and we're almost, what would you say, we're about 50% done? A little more?
I call it 50% as soon as that engine comes
As soon as yep.
We're about 40 right now.
Cool. All right, let's keep rocking and rolling. Back on the time lapse.
Now, unfortunately here, for some reason, I guess I forgot to start recording after the last clip that we made. So the only thing that you guys missed on the time lapse was us removing the intake and exhaust manifolds. You'll see the intake manifold on the front of the engine is already off, and then the exhaust manifold you'll see sitting back there in the background next to the subframe. They were pretty straightforward to remove, just nuts, bolts, and a couple of connectors. So now what you basically see us doing is removing the harness from the engine. Slowly but surely, we're basically working our way around the engine and disconnecting the harness from it, and disconnecting all the various sensors and all of the various brackets that secure it to the engine. Now, both of us at some point in this video did have our plumber's crack hanging out, so please do not mind. It's just a part of being a mechanic. If your butt's not hanging out at one point or another during your job, you're not doing your job correctly. So what you see us doing now is basically removing the torque converter nuts. This is the first car I've ever seen that had nuts instead of bolts for the torque converter. So the torque converter actually has studs on it, and then it's secured by nuts. And you have to remove the starter to get to them. Behind the starter, there's a little plastic inspection cover that comes out. So you see Brandon there at the crank pulley rotating the engine for me to get to each of the 4 bolts. And then from there, it is time to go ahead and start removing bell housing bolts to unmate the engine from the transmission, and you will see us do that shortly. Here we are rigging the old engine up to our engine hoist, and you'll see it kind of fought us coming out a little bit. The transmission wanted to move and shift and do all kinds of weird things. Here we are pulling the flex plate off of the engine. The flex plate is basically what would be a flywheel if you had a manual transmission car. It's just a thin plate with teeth on it to engage the starter, and it is what allows the torque converter to bolt up to the engine. And then in Brandon's hand, you'll see a little spacer. That spacer goes on the engine. It provides, I guess, a certain amount of air gap between the engine and the transmission in order for them to mate correctly for the front pump of the transmission, or whatever the case may be. I'm not sure why they use them, but they do, and it is super important. So if you're doing one of these, don't forget to replace that, or you will have problems. Now, the torque converter did come out of the transmission ever so slightly, and it's super important that you double check and make sure that your torque converter is seated into the transmission, or when you bolt your engine up to it, you risk blowing out the front pump of the transmission, which obviously is never a good time. So now you see us securing the flex plate back to the new engine. Now, we did have a choice to make here. We could have used the flex plate that came with the engine, or we could have used the flex plate that was off of the old engine, and we decided to use the one that was from the old engine, just in case there was any differences in transmissions between the CX5 and the 6. We wanted to keep the flywheel with the transmission, if that makes sense. Now, here you're going to see we struggled quite a bit getting this to line up. This is where, if we had a powertrain table, this would have been a lot easier. We kind of did this the MacGyver way with wood, and hindsight is 20/20. It would have saved me a ton of time to spend an extra, $400 or $500 on a powertrain table, but then that's something that I then have to find a place for and store in the garage and take up space. So I don't plan on having to drop a ton of engines out the bottom here on the channel. This isn't something that we usually do. This was just one of those things where I couldn't pass up this car because of what it's worth and the deal that we got on it. So you got to make do with what you have and just keep rocking and rolling, and that is exactly what we did here. So what we ultimately ended up doing here is getting it close enough, and then we stuck a punch in one of the dowels for the transmission and the engine to kind of keep it from moving, and then we wiggled it and moved it as needed until we can get 1 or 2 bolts started, and then we gently used those bolts to pull the engine and transmission together. Ordinarily, I'd say never ever do that because, again, you can end up ruining the transmission pump. But we had Brandon on one side and me on the other, and as we were tightening, we were making sure that the torque converter was never in a position where it was being, having excessive pressure applied to it. So now what you're going to see us doing is just beginning to route the harness onto the new engine. You got to plug in the fuel injectors before you put the intake manifold on. So that's what you see Brandon doing, and then you see me in the back. I'm back there with my whiz wheel cleaning off the exhaust ports and getting it ready for a new exhaust manifold gasket and to replace the catalytic converter and exhaust manifold. So now we're just putting our finishing touches here on the harness before we throw the manifolds on. You're going to see Brandon momentarily go ahead and grab an intake. Again, we decided to go with the intake that came with the new engine. It just seemed to be in better shape. So that was what we did. You'll see Brandon there put some new intake manifold gaskets on. And I am ready in the back with the exhaust manifold right there. You'll see I probably take this thing on and off like 2 or 3 times trying to figure out what bolts go where, because I was too stubborn to ask Brandon, but we ended up getting everything in. And in the next clip, you'll see the engine going back into the car. All right, guys, so what you just watched us do is swap the old engine over to the new one. We decided to use the manifold that came with the new engine. When we pulled the old manifold off, there was like some milky residue in the bottom of the manifold, and we decided it'd be better to, run the one that came with the engine. So now we're at a point now we're gonna lower the car back down and get the engine back in. All right, guys, so what you're going to see here is we're actually lowering the car back down onto the powertrain. Now, this was kind of tricky without a powertrain table because obviously the pallet, engine, and transmission moved when we were taking everything apart. So it was hard to get everything lined up. I ended up having to climb underneath the car with a ratchet strap to the lift arm, which you'll see me do in a second, and kind of ratchet the pallet back in order to get the engine and transmission where it needed to be, to clear everything to basically fit where it needs to fit. You'll see it moving nicely into place, and then you'll see us lower the car back down onto it, and then we did the transmission mount first, and then we bolted the engine mount in, and we lifted the car up, and obviously you'll see in a moment here that the powertrain stayed with the car, which basically means that we made the engine, transmission, and the unibody of the car, which is huge. Here you see us fighting with the alternator a little bit, trying to get it in. It is kind of tricky to get that in there with the air conditioning compressor in the way. If we could have done it any other way, we would have, but we just had to fight with it a little bit. You'll also see me fighting with my pants a bit. Again, should have wore a belt. Sorry for the butt crack. It is what it is. All right, guys, so this is where we left off. This CX5 engine is a perfect fit here. For this Mazda 6, everything bolted right in. Even the intake manifold that came with the car, everything's in. Alternator's in. Air conditioning compressor is in. We opted to pull the compressor off of the engine and drop the engine with leaving the compressor in the car. That way we didn't have to do anything with the air conditioning as far as evacuating and recharging and things like that. So all we have left to do now is we need to do the rest of our wiring here. We need to put the shifter linkage back in. I need to flush that automatic transmission cooler, and I also need to flush the heater core. I've already gone ahead. I took that overflow bottle into the house and I cleaned it out really good with Cascade dish detergent. So we're going to flush the radiator, flush the heater core, flush the automatic transmission cooler, and we should be able to get most of that coolant oil emulsion out of the system. Anything that's left over will eventually float to the top of the system, the top being the radiator cap, and get pushed into the overflow. So we'll drive it around for a couple weeks, and we'll probably have to drain that a couple times just to make sure we got everything out. But you'll see the subframe is back here. That needs to go up. Steering shaft needs to go back in. And then we went ahead and pulled the oil pan off of this old engine. We do need it because, as I showed you earlier in the video, there is a hole in that oil pan. And
definitely stay tuned. Our next video with this car, after we get it running, obviously, is going to be tearing this engine down and figuring out exactly what went wrong inside of here. So stay tuned. We got a little bit more work to do, get the engine in the car, and the next time we're recording, hopefully we have a running engine. We have the subframe back up. We have the oil pan from this engine swapped over from that engine. And I did let that RTV soak overnight. So what we're going to go ahead and do today is we're going to go ahead and fill it up with some nice fresh oil. It takes about 5 quarts of 0W20. So this is what we went with, some Castrol. We're going to go ahead and dump that in. You'll see here I connected the steering, tie rods. I did the sway bar end links. I put the axles back in. So the suspension down here, for all intents and purposes, is ready to go. Engine mounts in, belts in. Everything down here is pretty much done, minus those shields. I am not going to put those shields back up yet because we still do have to flush the heater core. I'm waiting for the coolant to get here to do that. I don't want to flush the core and then leave it with water sitting in it and have it freeze. Out here it does get pretty cold. The only thing that we ordered additionally is, number one, we ordered a set of brakes, front and rear. We're going to do pads and rotors on all 4 corners. I want this car to be perfect for somebody. And then I didn't like what I saw when I pulled down that transmission cooler to flush it. There's such small little passages in there, and this engine got hot, that cooler got hot, and I don't want a $200 part to, be the reason that something happens with this car. So we did order a new transmission cooler. We ordered the seals for it, and we also ordered a couple of quarts of Mazda trans fluid to go ahead and make sure that it has all the fluid in it that it needs. So let's lower it back down now. I'm going to show you where we're at up top, and like I said, we're going to dump some oil in it, and maybe even start it up and let it run for a minute. I don't want to let it run for long. Again, there's no coolant in it, but I would like to hear it fire. So up here we have various little odds and ends to secure. You'll see here we have to do our transmission cable. We have to move the battery box down into its place, connect a couple of grounds. You'll see here's a power cable here that goes to the positive terminal. But everything on this side of the car is done. We took the overflow tank out, flushed it. We do still have to flush the radiator. So let's go ahead and dump some oil in here. So I think the spec for this is like 4.8 or 4.9 quarts. I'm going to dump all 5 in it. Like I said, we had the oil pan completely off. So that extra 0.1 quart that might stay in the pan, we cleaned out. So let's just let it have a nice fresh oil change here. Beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. All right, let's go ahead and throw the air box in, connect the fuel lines, and do whatever else we need to do. All right, guys, like I said, it's got oil in it, no coolant. Fuel lines are connected, batteries in, air box is in. I'm nervous. Let's see if it runs. Try it one more time. All right, small little setback there. We did find a couple of vacuum hoses that I thought were connected, but because we used the different intake manifold, we used the manifold that the engine came with versus the one in the car. It looked like they were plugged in at the intake side, but on the engine side, they were not. It was just going to a dead spot. So That's why the second time I started it, it was backfiring out the intake a little bit. It was trying to control the idle. So I plugged those 2 vacuum lines in, and let's try that again. And that is exactly what we were hoping for. Perfect first start, couple little hiccups there, but now we got it to the point I can throw wheels on it, start it and back it out. And as soon as this freezing weather that we have here in New Jersey passes, we can go ahead and flush that heater core. We can replace that trans cooler, and we can flush the radiator, fill it up with coolant. And then we got a brake job coming for it. We're gonna go ahead and do all the brakes, and she'll be ready to go. All right, guys, and that's gonna be it for this video. We did what we set out to do. We got the old engine over there out of this car. We got the new engine in. We fired it. You've heard it run. And we only have some little things to take care of off camera. We just have to fill it up with coolant, which you've seen me do numerous times on numerous cars. So I don't really think I need to show you that again. And then the engine job is, you know, basically done after we do our flushes and fill it up. So please like, share, and subscribe if this interested you. Please, to my current viewers that always watch my videos, let me know how you like the new format with the voiceovers when we did the time-lapse versus the random music. I think the voiceover adds a nice touch. It kind of lets you guys know what we're doing instead of just hearing some random background music. It's something I wanted to try, and hopefully it worked out. So please, like, share, and subscribe. Stay tuned. We're going to do another video on this, basically prepping it for sale, doing the brakes, washing it, buffing it, things like that. And then we're gonna do a video tearing this milkshake here down. We're gonna tear it completely down to the block. We're gonna check the head, see what's going on with it, and then maybe we'll save it if we can and sell it. If not, to the scrap heap it goes. So again, like, share, subscribe, comment down below, let me know what you think, and we'll see you next time.